He was 56, a widower, a father of 3 grown children who thought he'd never love again. She was 28, a fashion designer from Lagos, chasing a dream in a world that didn't expect her to succeed. But what neither of them knew was that his late wife held the secret that destroyed her family years before they ever met. Would love be enough to survive a betrayal neither of them chose? Stay with me till the end, because this story has a twist you will not see coming. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Klaus Richter had built an empire out of thread and fabric. For 30 years, his textile company had supplied some of Europe's finest fashion houses, from small ateliers in Milan to global names in Paris. He was known in the industry as precise, disciplined, and impossible to rattle. But 3 years ago, on a quiet Tuesday morning, his wife Ingrid closed her eyes after her tea and never opened them again. An aneurysm, the doctors said. No warning, no goodbye. Since then, Klaus went through the motions. Wake up at 5:30. Coffee, black, no sugar. The way Ingrid used to make it for him for 31 years. Work, meetings, contracts. Come home to a house in the Bavarian countryside that echoed with a silence so loud it sometimes felt like a physical weight on his chest. His 3 children. Greta, 34, the eldest, practical, married with 2 kids of her own. Lena, 31, sharp-tongued, a lawyer, fiercely protective of the family name. And Felix, 26, the quiet one, still finding his footing in the family business, had all grown and built their own lives. Every Sunday, they gathered for dinner at Klaus's house, a tradition Ingrid had started decades ago. Every Sunday, Klaus sat at the head of the table, in the chair that used to face hers, and smiled through the ache. He told himself he was fine. He was not fine. He was waiting for something he could not name, could not explain, and honestly, did not believe would ever come. That something was about to walk into a fabric showroom 4,000 miles away, in Lagos, Nigeria, a city Klaus had never once considered visiting until a business associate insisted he attend an international textile summit there. He almost canceled the trip 3 times. Amara grew up in a modest home in Surulere, Lagos, watching her mother's hands stitch magic out of Ankara cloth on an old Singer sewing machine that groaned with every stitch. Her mother, Ngozi, had once run a thriving textile business, Chidib Fabrics, supplying prints to markets across West Africa. But when Amara was just 15, everything changed. A European buyer who had signed a multi-year supply contract with Ngozi's company pulled out without warning, canceling the deal overnight, citing restructuring. The debt Ngozi had taken on to expand production came due all at once. Within a year, the business was gone. The family moved to a smaller apartment. Amara remembered her mother crying quietly in the kitchen, thinking no one could hear her. Amara never forgot that lesson. In this industry, powerful people from far away could destroy your entire world and never even learn your name. She vowed 2 things that year. She would rebuild what her mother lost, and she would never again let someone else hold that kind of power over her family. At 28, she had already made real progress. Her studio, small, cramped, but full of energy, produced bold, modern designs using traditional Ankara wax prints, reimagined for a global audience. Local influencers had started wearing her pieces. A boutique in London had placed a small order. It wasn't much, but it was hers. When she was invited to showcase her collection at the Lagos International Textile Summit, she almost said no. The idea of standing in front of European buyers, the very kind of people who had destroyed her mother, made her stomach turn. But her mother, now in her late 50s, took her hands and said something Amara would remember for the rest of her life. "You are not responsible for what they did to me. Go show them who you are." Amara went. She had no idea the moment would also be a beginning she never saw coming, one that would eventually force her to face the very ghost her mother had never fully escaped. The summit hall in Lagos was buzzing with color, music, and ambition, a stark contrast to the quiet, orderly trade shows Klaus was used to in Frankfurt and Milan. He stood near the back, feeling out of place in his tailored gray suit among the bold prints and vibrant energy, checking his watch, already thinking about his return flight. Then the runway lights shifted, and Amara's final piece appeared. A modern gown built entirely from hand-dyed Ankara fabric, its patterns telling a story. Deep indigo waves representing struggle, gold threading representing resilience, and a burst of orange at the hem representing rebirth. Klaus, a man who had spent his life around fabric, who could identify a weave by touch alone, had never seen anything like it. He stopped checking his watch. "Who made this?" he asked one of the summit organizers. "That would be Miss Chaideep," came the reply, with a note of pride. "She's the one to watch this year. Started with nothing. Now half of Lagos wants her designs." Klaus introduced himself after her presentation, complimenting her work with genuine specificity. The tension of her weave, the boldness of her color choices, the storytelling in the fabric itself. Amara was polite, professional, but guarded. She'd met men like him before at these summits. European buyers who admired her work right up until they didn't need her anymore, or worse, who saw her only as a discount source of exotic prints for their own collections. "Are you looking to place an order, Mr. Richter?" she asked, testing him. "No," he said. "I'm looking to understand how you did this." That answer surprised her. He didn't try to buy anything that day. He simply asked questions, genuine ones, about her process, her mother's old business, her dreams for where the brand could go. For the first time in years, Klaus felt something other than grief stir in his chest. And for the first time in a long time, Amara felt something other than guardedness around a man from Europe. Neither of them said anything about it, but neither of them forgot it either. Klaus was scheduled to fly back to Germany 2 days after the summit ended. He didn't. He told his team it was for additional market research. In truth, he had asked Amara to show him her studio, a request she almost declined before curiosity got the better of her. Her studio was nothing like the polished ateliers Klaus was used to. Fabric scraps covered every surface. A single fan struggled against the Lagos heat. Sketches were pinned haphazardly across one wall, some crossed out, others circled in red ink, marking her best ideas. "It's not much," Amara said, almost defensively. "It's honest," Klaus replied. "I have walked through factories worth millions of euros that have less soul than this room." Over the following days, what began as professional curiosity slowly became something else. They talked for hours, about his late wife, about her mother's collapsed business, about grief, about ambition, about the strange loneliness of building something people only saw the finished version of. Klaus extended his trip again. Then again. Back in Germany, his children noticed the change during their weekly calls, a lightness in his voice, a warmth that had been missing for 3 years. "Papa sounds different," Greta said to Lena over the phone. "Different how?" Lena asked, arms crossed, even though her sister couldn't see her. "Happy," Greta said simply. Lena wasn't ready to celebrate. Not yet. Something about it made her uneasy, though she couldn't name why. When Klaus finally returned to Germany after nearly 3 weeks, far longer than any research trip required, he gathered his children for their usual Sunday dinner. This time, he made an announcement. "I've met someone," he said simply. "Her name is Amara. I'd like you all to meet her eventually." Greta smiled cautiously. Felix, distracted, said, "That's great, Papa," while scrolling on his phone. But Lena set down her fork. "Papa, you barely know this woman. You met her 3 weeks ago at a conference." "I know what I feel, Lena. Feelings aren't facts. What do you actually know about her? Her family? Her business? Anything?" Klaus, normally so composed, felt a flash of something rare for him, defensiveness. "I know enough." The dinner ended tensely, but it was what happened afterward that would set the entire story on its true course. Felix, still living partially out of his late mother's old office while helping finalize estate paperwork, had been going through Ingrid's old business archives, decades of contracts, supplier agreements, and correspondence from when she had served as CFO of Klaus's company in its earlier, smaller years. Late that night, sorting through a box labeled simply 2011, Africa Expansion, terminated, Felix found a folder with a name that meant nothing to him at the time. Chaideep Fabrics. Contract termination. Inside was a formal letter, signed by Ingrid Richter, canceling a multi-year supply agreement without notice or compensation, citing internal restructuring, the very language, though Felix didn't know it yet, that had once devastated a small family business 4,000 miles away. He set the folder aside, thinking little of it. A common name. A common business decision. Nothing more. He had no idea he was holding the exact document that would one day break his father's heart all over again. Months passed. What started as a long-distance curiosity between Klaus and Amara deepened into something neither of them had planned for or fully understood. Video calls stretched late into the night. Across a 6-hour time difference neither of them minded anymore. Klaus found himself learning to identify Ankara patterns by name. Amara found herself asking about German winters, about grief, about what it felt like to build a life, and then have to rebuild it after loss. Klaus, wanting to support her business honestly, not as a rescuer, but as a partner, arranged a formal collaboration. Amara would travel to Germany to co-design a limited collection blending Ankara prints with European tailoring, to be showcased at a major fashion gala his company was sponsoring in Munich. When Amara arrived in Germany, she saw a different side of Klaus than the polished businessman from the summit. She saw him be gentle with his grandchildren, respected by his employees, many of whom had worked for him for over a decade. Still quietly, achingly in love with a wife he had lost, a framed photo of Ingrid still sat on his office desk, and Amara noticed he never moved it, never hid it from her. She found she respected that more than she resented it. Their connection deepened into something undeniable. He admired her fire, her refusal to shrink herself to fit anyone else's comfort. She admired his stillness, his willingness to sit with hard emotions instead of running from them. Age, culture, distance, history, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Greta welcomed Amara warmly, genuinely curious about her work. Felix, easygoing as always, liked her immediately. But Lena remained distant, polite but cool, watching more than speaking. And Lena, being a lawyer by training and suspicious by nature, had quietly started doing what she did best, research. She began by simply Googling Amara's family background. Public information, nothing invasive, she told herself. Then she found an old news article, barely indexed, about the collapse of a Lagos textile business in 2011. Chaideep Fabrics. The name stopped her cold. She had seen it somewhere recently, in her father's house, of all places. Lena drove to her father's house on a Tuesday afternoon, while Klaus was at the office, ostensibly to help sort through more of Ingrid's old estate paperwork, a task Felix had left half-finished in a box in the study. She found the folder Felix had set aside months earlier. Chaideep Fabrics. Contract termination, 2011. Her hands were steady as she read the letter, but her mind was racing. She cross-referenced the dates, the amounts, and the language of internal restructuring. It matched, almost word for word, the language in the old news article about the business's sudden and devastating collapse. Ingrid Richter, her mother, Klaus's late wife, had personally signed the letter that ended Chaideep Fabrics. Ended Ngozi Chaideep's life's work. Ended, in many ways, the childhood Amara might have had. Lena sat alone in her father's study for nearly an hour, staring at the paper, feeling sick. This wasn't just an uncomfortable coincidence. This was a direct, unbroken line between her mother's business decision and the woman her father now loved. She thought about telling Felix. She thought about telling Greta. She thought, briefly, about burning the folder and saying nothing at all, letting her father have this happiness without ever knowing the cost of it. But Lena had built her entire career on the belief that truth, however painful, mattered more than comfortable silence. She just didn't yet know how, or when, or in front of whom, she would have to say it. The Munich Fashion Gala was the biggest event Klaus's company had sponsored in years, a celebration of the new German-Nigerian collaborative collection, with Amara's designs as the centerpiece. Press from across Europe and West Africa had been invited. It was, by every measure, a triumphant night for Amara's growing brand. Klaus stood at Amara's side for most of the evening, introducing her with open pride to business partners he'd known for decades. For the first time since Ingrid's death, he felt something like joy in a room full of people. Lena watched from across the hall, the folder's contents replaying in her mind every time she saw her father laugh, every time she saw Amara's face light up under the gallery lights. She had told herself she would wait for the right moment. A quiet moment. A private one. But near the end of the night, as photographers gathered for a group photo of Klaus, Amara, and the design team, Lena's composure finally cracked. She approached Amara near the champagne table, away from the cameras, but not far enough from earshot. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Lena asked, her voice tight. Amara, sensing the tension immediately, nodded and stepped aside with her. Before you go any further with my father, Lena said quietly, hands trembling slightly around her glass, you should know something. My mother, Ingrid, ran the company that canceled your mother's contract in 2011. Chaideep Fabrics. That was you, wasn't it? Your family. Amara felt the floor tilt beneath her. The name of the company that ended her mother's business, a name burned into her memory since she was 15 years old, had a face now. And that face belonged to the family she had just spent the evening surrounded by, celebrated by, falling for. Say that again, Amara whispered. Lena, immediately regretting her tone but not her honesty, repeated it. Amara set down her glass. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply walked outside into the cold Munich night air, needing to breathe. Klaus found Amara nearly 20 minutes later, standing alone near the hotel's garden terrace, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Amara, what happened? Lena said you two spoke, but she wouldn't tell me. Your wife destroyed my mother's business, Amara said flatly, cutting him off. 2011. A company called Chaideep Fabrics. Cancelled contract, no warning, no compensation. My family lost everything because of a decision your wife made from an office in Germany, probably without a second thought. Klaus went pale. Amara, I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea. Ingrid handled Africa expansion decisions in those years, before I took over that division personally. I never even saw that contract. That doesn't change what happened, Amara said, her voice cracking now. It doesn't change my mother crying in our kitchen for a year. It doesn't change growing up watching her rebuild from nothing while people like your family moved on without ever knowing our name. I know, Klaus said quietly, and I am not asking you to forgive that tonight. I'm only asking you to believe that I never knew, and that it changes nothing about how I feel about you. That's the problem, Klaus, Amara said, finally looking at him directly, tears in her eyes. It changes everything. Because now every time I look at you, I'll wonder what else your family took from mine without ever knowing it. She left the gala that night without saying goodbye to anyone. By morning, she had already booked a flight back to Lagos. Klaus spent the following weeks in a silence that felt disturbingly familiar, the same heavy quiet he had known after Ingrid's death. But this silence was different. This time, there was no ambiguity about what had caused it. This time, he had a choice about what to do next. He confronted Lena directly. You could have told me privately. You could have told me first. I tried to protect you, Lena said, though even she wasn't fully convinced by her own words. I didn't know how else to do it without it becoming a spectacle. You didn't protect me, Lena. You took the choice away from me. I deserve to be the one to tell her the truth, however painful, in my own way, in my own time. It was, by all accounts, the most honest argument the two had ever had, and, painfully, the beginning of them actually understanding each other better. Klaus spent the following days pulling every remaining record from the 2011 Africa Expansion Archive. He found the original termination letter, the financial statements, and, buried in an old accounting ledger, proof that the restructuring had actually been a cost-cutting decision that saved the company relatively little money at devastating human cost to a small family business overseas. He didn't try to hide any of it or minimize it to himself. He read every page. Then he made a decision that surprised even his own children. He would not simply apologize. He would act. Klaus personally contacted Ngozi Chaideep, Amara's mother, requesting a meeting, not through lawyers, not through intermediaries, but face-to-face, in Lagos, alone. He told her everything. The contract, his late wife's decision, the years he never knew. And then he made an offer, not a quiet payout meant to erase guilt, but a genuine, structured investment to rebuild Chaideep Fabrics into what it might have become had it never been destroyed. Full ownership remaining with Ngozi and Amara. No strings, no company branding, no public credit if they didn't want it. Ngozi listened in near silence for most of the conversation. When Klaus finished, she said only, "Money does not undo 15 years, Mr. Richter." "I know," Klaus said. "I'm not offering to undo anything. I'm offering it because it's owed, whether or not it fixes what happened." Then he asked to see Amara. Ngozi didn't promise anything, but she didn't refuse either. Klaus flew back to Lagos 3 weeks later, not as a buyer, not as an investor, but simply as a man, fabric samples in one hand and no expectations in the other, standing outside the studio where he'd first learned who Amara really was. Amara didn't answer the door right away. When she finally did, she said nothing for a long moment, simply studying his face. "I'm not here asking you to forgive my late wife," Klaus said quietly. "I'm not even asking you to forgive me for not knowing. I'm here because I think love isn't about erasing the past. I think it's about choosing to face it together, honestly, instead of pretending it doesn't exist." Amara looked at him for a long time. Then, finally, she stepped aside and let him in. Some wounds don't heal in a single conversation. Some trust isn't rebuilt in a single gesture. But that afternoon marked the beginning of something neither of them had expected when they first met at a fabric summit months earlier. Not a fairy tale, but something more honest. Two people choosing, deliberately, to build something new out of threads that had once been torn apart. Threads of Destiny isn't just a love story. It's a story about the invisible ways our choices, and the choices made by the people we love, ripple into other lives, long before we ever meet them. What would you have done in Amara's position? Could you forgive a debt you never agreed to, caused by someone you never even met? And what about Lena? Was she wrong to tell the truth the way she did, or was some truth simply too important to wait for the right moment? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because our next story is coming very soon, and trust me, you will not want to miss it.